A chuirde is Michel Lárás McCarrig uachtar an Cumann Lúthla Scaol, agus chun fáilte roimh go léir go réamhrán a ruan do cógáil speisialta fiche héin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a motions briefing for Special Congress 2021. Special Congress will be held on October the 23rd, and Fergal McGill, Director of Games Administration, and Tom Ryan, Ards Churahor, will give you details of the motions. I look forward to a good discussion and debate on the motions in the next few weeks. Goramila Mahgwif.
Motions on the floor for consideration by Special Congress. These were all deferred from Congress in February last, and they retain the numberings that were used when they were first published. Motions 1 and 3 are proposed by Central Council. Motion 9 is proposed by St Patrick's Fermanagh. Motion 11 is proposed by Corla Lyon. Motions 18 and 19 are proposed by the Calendar Review Task Force, and motions 29, 35, 36 and 37 are proposed by the International Work Group. So Fergal and I will take you through what each motion means and is intended to achieve. In every case, a majority of 60% will be required for the motion to pass, and in 9 of the 10 cases, any rule change will come into effect 4 weeks after Special Congress. The sole exception here is motion 9, where competitions which are already underway under the existing arrangements will conclude before the rule change comes into effect. Motion number 1 seeks to resolve recent ambiguity about the role of the development officer in a county. It addresses the fact that the term development can encompass a number of disciplines, so the proposal is to assign that responsibility to 2 roles and to make very clear the scope of each role and the distinction between them. And the motion does this in 6 steps. Firstly, it redesignates the current development officer as a newly defined planning and training officer. It also redesignates the current safety officer as a newly defined safety and facilities officer. So we have 2 new roles. Then the motion renames the Planning and Physical Development and Safety Committee as the Safety and Facilities Committee, and it establishes a new Planning and Training Committee. So we also have 2 new or 2 redefined committees which are aligned to the 2 new roles. Furthermore, then, the motion defines in detail the scope and the terms of reference of each of these committees. Both of the new positions are appointed, and the issue of whether or not these positions will have a vote within the county is a matter to be decided locally. Motion number 3 establishes in rule an Audit and Risk Committee as a subcommittee of the County Committee. The motion sets out in detail the role, scope and composition of the new committee, and it establishes independent and external oversight of the committee at provincial level. And finally, the motion also provides for the same structures to be introduced at provincial and at national level. Now, of course, such committees already exist in many counties and provinces already and at national level, so this motion is making the establishment of the Audit and Risk Committee mandatory. Motion 9 deals with how walkovers are treated for the purposes of match suspensions. Clearly and currently, a walkover does not count as a match when considering how many games of a suspension have been served. This motion proposes to change that arrangement such that a walkover will not now count as a match served for players and officials from the team who concede the walkover. For the team receiving the walkover, the game will actually count. Motion 11 is concerned with the composition of the County Committee as defined in Rule 318B. If Motion 1, that we've just discussed a moment ago, is passed, then Motion 11 will simply extend the definition of the County Committee to include the newly created Safety and Facilities Officer. Motion 29 considers representation of units at Congress. Currently, counties are represented by 1 delegate for every 10 affiliated clubs, to a maximum of 10 delegates and a minimum of 4. And counties with fewer than 5 affiliations will have 2 delegates. The new proposal introduces a distinction whereby a county which has not played in the previous year's senior inter-county championship will have reduced representation as follows. 1 delegate for every 10 affiliated clubs as before, but to a maximum of 5 and a minimum of 3 delegates. And counties with fewer than 5 affiliations will have 2 delegates, again as before. Motion 35 considers the administration and approval process for players who are playing internationally on a temporary basis, and it proposes a new licensing system which will completely replace the current system of sanctions and weekend authorizations. The proposal is that when a player from outside World GAA wishes to play in World GAA jurisdiction, he will now apply for a license of fixed duration. He can only receive 1 such license in any calendar year. He cannot play with his own club during the period of the license. And when the license expires, the player will revert automatically to his own domestic club and at his previous domestic grade. And another provision in here is that inter-county players will not be eligible to receive a license until their county has been eliminated from the championship. Motion 36 is concerned with the impact on a player's grading when he plays overseas. Rule 6.19.5 currently states that a player doesn't lose his grading by virtue of playing at a higher grade championship in USGAA, New York, Canada, or Europe. Now, this motion proposes deleting this element of the rule, because if motion 35, which we've just dealt with above, if that motion succeeds, then the same grading safeguards will now be built into the new licensing arrangements, and Rule 6.19.5 will no longer be required. So motion 36 then simply serves to delete Rule 6.19.5. Motion 37 deals with the jurisdiction of the DRA. Rule 7.13 currently limits DRA access to units and members in Ireland and in Britain. So this motion proposes to extend this right of access to other international units, and specifically to such other counties, provinces, or administrative areas as may be agreed by both the Secretary of the Disputes Resolution Authority and Central Council.
So the first motion on the clár in relation to the football championship will be motion 18. That's the one we refer to as the 8-team provincial championship motion. So in motion 18 there would be 2 phases to the provincial championships. The first phase would see preliminary rounds played in Leinster, three preliminary rounds in Leinster, and in Ulster, 1 preliminary round in Ulster. So in Leinster, those preliminary rounds would be played between the 6th lowest ranked teams at the end of that year's Alliance League. And what would happen there is they would enter 3 Leinster preliminary rounds, which would be played at neutral venues. So those 6 teams would play off against each other. And then the winners of those games would go to the Leinster Championship, and the defeated teams in those games would go 2 of them to the Munster Championship and 1 of them to the Connacht Championship. In other words, the 2 teams going to Munster to make up 8 teams in Munster, and 1 of the teams going to Connacht to help Connacht get to 8 teams in their championship. And then in Ulster, it would be the 2 lowest ranked teams at the end of that year's Alliance League. They would enter the preliminary round. The game would be played at a neutral venue. Again, the winners of that game would continue to the Ulster Championship, and the losers would go to the Connacht Championship. So once you have those preliminary rounds played in that first phase, it means that there are then 8 teams in each provincial championship. So then in the second phase, there would be 8 teams in each province. You'd have 2 groups of 4. Each team would play 3 round-robin games in the provincial championship. The groups would be seeded, so the first, fourth, fifth and eighth highest ranked teams from the Alliance Leagues would be in Group 1 in each case, and the second, third, sixth and seventh highest ranked from the Alliance Leagues from that province would be in Group 2. Each county would have one home game, one away game and one neutral game, and those would be based on draws carried out by the provincial councils at the start of the championships. So then at the end of the round robin phase, the group winners would go on to the provincial final, and the bottom teams in each group, as well as New York, would play in a knockout Tailteann Cup. Now I say the bottom teams in each provincial group, presuming they're Division 3 or 4 counties. The second and third place teams then would go into All-Ireland qualifiers. And round one of the qualifiers, you'd have 8 games in it. It would be all of the second place teams from the provincial groups playing at home to third place teams from the provincial groups. Round 2, there'd be 4 games in that. That would be the winners of round 1 playing off against each other, and again the venues for those would be based on draws. Round 3 would see the round 2 winners playing against the beaten provincial finalists, and those games would be at neutral venues. And then finally you get on to the All-Ireland quarter-finals, where the round 3 winners would play the provincial champions again at neutral venues. And then you move on to All-Ireland semi-finals and All-Ireland finals as we currently have them, I suppose. So what we have here is an illustrative calendar of how the intercounty season might look if Motion 18 was to be passed. And this comes with a health warning, of course. It will be up to CCC every year to finalise the fixtures, but this is approximately what it might look like. So your Alliance Leagues would start down here, if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, on the last weekend in January, the 29th and 30th of January, and your leagues would run the whole way up to the league finals in April. The preliminary rounds that I mentioned there in Ulster and Leinster could then begin on the 9th and 10th of April, with the round robin aspect of the football championship starting here on the 23rd, 24th of April. These are all 2022 dates, by the way. So you play your round robins and you get up as far as your provincial finals, which would be roughly the 21st, 22nd of May. The qualifiers would also start on that weekend. Second round of the qualifiers there, you can see it on May the 28th, 29th, and so on as far as the All-Ireland football quarter-finals on the 18th and 19th of June, the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship semi-finals on the 2nd and 3rd of July, and the All-Ireland football final on whatever the 29th week of the year is when the football final will be on going forward. Likewise, the Tailteann Cup, you'd have your quarter-finals potentially the week after the round robin provincials finish. You'd have your semi-finals at the start of June and potentially your final there in the middle of June. So that's approximately how it would look. Obviously, as I say, final decisions on a calendar would come down to CCC, but it's just to give people an illustration of how things might work. So to summarise Motion 18, the Alliance Leagues would remain unchanged and played in spring as they are currently. Then you would have the Provincial and All-Ireland Championships played between April and July. You would have preliminary rounds in Ulster and Leinster to get to a situation where you would have 8 teams in each provincial championship, and the provincial championship would be played off as round robin groups of 4, with qualifiers leading to knockout quarterfinals, semis and the All-Ireland final. And then the Tailteann Cup would be knockout, and it would be for teams from Division 3 and 4 who finish bottom of their provincial round robin groups, as well of course as New York. So that's the first proposal, Motion 18. So we now move on to Motion 19, which is the one which would envisage playing the current league structures, using them as the structure for the championship. So in Motion 19, essentially, you would flip the provincial championships and the league from their current positioning. As we all know, the league is currently played before the championships. What Motion 19 endeavours to do is to actually play the provincial championships first and then play the Alliance Leagues. So the provincial championships would be round robin competitions played in February and March. You'd have a group of 6 teams in Connacht, a group of 6 teams in Munster, and then in Leinster you'd have a group of 5 teams and 1 group of 6 teams, and in Ulster you'd have 1 group of 4 teams and 1 group of 5 teams. So the Connacht and Munster championships, what would happen there is each team would play 5 games, 2 home games, 3 away games, or vice versa, depending on a draw. The group winners would go to the provincial final directly, and then the second and third place teams in Connacht and Munster would play in a provincial semi-final, with the winner obviously going on to the provincial final. In Ulster then, as I mentioned, there would be two groups, one with 4 teams in it, one with 5. The games will be again home and away on the basis of a draw, and the top 2 teams in each group would go to crossover semi-finals. What I mean by that is the winner in one group would play the runner-up in the other group, and vice versa. They would go to semi-finals, and then the 2 winning teams from the semi-finals obviously would participate in the Ulster final. Leinster is reasonably similar, except there would be 2 groups in Leinster, one of 5 teams, one of 6 teams. The teams in the 5-team group would play 4 round-robin games. The teams in the 6-team group would play 5 round-robin games. Again, they would be home and away on the basis of a draw, and the group compositions would be on the basis of a draw at the start of the year. And then the top 2 teams in each group would go to crossover semi-finals, with the winners going on to the provincial final, the Leinster provincial final. So, as I mentioned, those provincial championships in the 4 provinces will be played in February and March. The winners of those would be the winners for the year, and that's it. It doesn't have any knock-on effect on the championship. The championship will start after those provincial championships have been played, and will be played on a league basis. So you either win the Ulster Championship or the Leinster Championship or the Connacht Championship or the Munster Championship. That's it. It leads no further. So the All-Ireland Championship then would take place on a league structure, the structure that we're currently familiar with in the Alliance Football Leagues, Division 1 to Division 4, and it would be played between April and July. There'll be 4 divisions, 8 teams per division, so each team would get 7 games. And then at the end of that round-robin series, the top 5 in Division 1 would qualify automatically for the All-Ireland Senior Championship quarterfinals, along with the Division 2 winners. That's 6 teams. The other 2 teams to make the quarterfinals would come from preliminary All-Ireland quarterfinals, and those quarterfinals would be played between the 2nd and 3rd place teams in Division 2, as well as the Division 3 and Division 4 winners. So all other Division 1 and 2 teams, that's 8 in total, would be eliminated at this point. And as we're used to in the current leagues, the bottom 2 teams in each division would be relegated for the following year. Now, the top team from Division 3 would be automatically promoted each year, along with the Tailteann Cup winners. And the top 2 teams in Division 4 would be promoted to Division 3 every year, unless the Tailteann winners are a Division 4 team from outside of the top 2. So how the Tailteann Cup would work then, it would include all Division 3 and 4 teams except the division winners. As we mentioned, the division winners go to preliminary All-Ireland quarterfinals. So all other Division 3 and 4 teams would be in the Tailteann Cup. It would be played on a knockout basis, and New York would play in the Tailteann Cup as well. So again, we have our illustrative calendar here. And just like in the previous motion, the season would begin down here in the bottom left-hand corner, which is the last weekend in January, the 29th, 30th of January. It would begin, but it would begin with those provincial championship round-robin competitions. So you would play those throughout February and March, with the provincial football finals potentially being on the first weekend in April. Then the league championship, if you want to call it that, would begin on the 9th and 10th of April. You would likely play 3 rounds in a row, then a break weekend, and then probably 3 more rounds, then another break, then finally your last round of the league competition before moving on to your preliminary quarterfinals, your All-Ireland quarterfinals there on the 18th and 19th of June, All-Ireland semi-finals on the first weekend of July, and potentially the All-Ireland final on week 29, the 16th and 17th of July. The Tailteann Cup then, as I mentioned, that's a knockout competition. That would start probably on the 11th and 12th of June, on to quarterfinals the following weekend, maybe a gap week, All-Ireland semi-finals, and then on the weekend of the All-Ireland football final, the Tailteann Cup final could potentially take place. So that's roughly what the calendar would look like if Motion 19 was passed. So to summarise Motion 19, you would have round-robin provincial championships in the springtime. Then the current league structure would be used for the All-Ireland Championships in the April to July time period. with teams qualifying for preliminary quarterfinals, semis, and the All-Ireland final. And then the Tailteann Cup will be played for all Division 3 and 4 teams who do not win their league division, as well, of course, as New York. So just one final point to note then in relation to Special Congress, and that's that if neither of the previous two options are passed at Congress, then for 2022 the Central Competitions Control Committee will be recommending to the GAA Central Council that we revert to the current provincial championship structures, played with qualifiers, with the new Tailteann Cup, which hasn't been played yet, and knockout quarterfinals rather than the round-robin quarterfinals which have been in place for the last number of years. So it's just to note that's what CCC will be proposing to Central Council, and it'll be ultimately up to Central Council to take a final decision if neither of the two motions are passed. Okay, Gura Maigut, Sinead, it's a brief overview, but hopefully enough to explain to people what the new championships might look like. Gura Maigut.